if you want to successfully execute box 3 innovation, then you have to construct an organization that is capable of overcoming 3 challenges: forget, borrow, and learn. I told you there are 3 important principles in constructing that organization, and the 3 important principles are based on: 1 for overcoming the forgetting challenge, another for overcoming the borrow challenge, and the 3rd principle for overcoming the learn challenge. What do we mean by forget, borrow, and learn? The forget challenge is the following. Your performance engine, your box 1 business, your scissors has a definition of business model. Again, business model definition relates to who's your customer, what value is the customer seeking, and what is the value chain architecture with which you are going to create that value. The box 3 business model experiment must forget the very definition of the business model of the performance engine. This is the forgetting challenge. By the way, it may be easy to say this, but it is extraordinarily difficult for organizations to forget their current dominant logic. Remember the story I told you about the 4 monkeys. Even when you introduced a new monkey, even if you recruit someone from the outside, how quickly you socialize that outsider or brainwash them into your way of doing things. Because what happens is these assumptions get deeply embedded. The assumptions about your current business model and how you make money in the performance engine get deeply embedded in your policy manuals, systems, structures. That is why forgetting those become extraordinarily difficult. Let me give you another parable, just to highlight the forgetting challenge. 2 monks from a monastery, they were taking a walk towards a village, and they came close to a stream of water, and they found a young woman standing there and crying. And the older monk asked the woman, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Look, I have to go for a wedding, which is on the other side of the river. And I'm wearing this beautiful sari that my mother made for me. But if I cross the water, I'm going to get completely drenched. I'm going to spoil this beautiful dress. And there are only a few more hours left before I need to attend the wedding. I don't know what to do. I'm helpless." And the old monk said, "Look, I understand your problem, but as a monk, I have taken a sacred vow not to touch a woman." So he started walking away. Then the young monk sort of thought to himself, yes, there is an assumption, there is a principle, there is an orthodoxy in monastery. But can't we find an exception to that rule when there is a non-linear change that happens in the environment? So he decided to carry that woman across the water and took her there safely on the other side. She was so happy. Then he came back, splashed across the water, came back here on the other side. And the old monk was very angry. He said, "You are a bad monk. You broke a sacred vow that we took not to touch a woman." And throughout their journey back to the monastery, he was scolding this young monk, saying, "You're a bad monk." And during the night, as both went to sleep, the old monk just woke up the young monk and said, "Look, you're a bad monk because you touched that woman. You are not supposed to touch a woman." And the young monk said, "What woman are you talking about?" "Yes, the woman in the river, remember? You carried her across." And the young monk told the old monk, "Look, I left that woman way back in that river. Why are you carrying her all the way back to the monastery?" The point is, every one of us carry a huge burden from the past, which gets so deeply embedded in the way we do things. Inside the performance engine, we don't even challenge whether it is relevant anymore when the environment takes a nonlinear shift. This is the forgetting challenge. How can you forget the very definition of the dominant logic which governs the performance engine? Here is the borrow challenge. While you need to construct an organization with a new logic, which is fundamentally different than the dominant logic, that new organization cannot be isolated from the dominant logic. Otherwise, there is no reason why you should be launching that box-free experiment. The only reason your organization can outcompete a pure Silicon Valley startup is there are some assets that you have in your performance engine that can go to benefit this box-free experiment. And these assets could be any number of things. It could be a brand name, it could be customer relationship, it could be manufacturing competencies, a whole lot of things. The borrow challenge is, the forget challenge says, you have to construct an organization with fundamentally different structures, systems, different culture as compared to the performance engine. The borrow challenge says that new organization, that new organizational logic has to interact with the dominant logic. Then only there will be effective borrowing. By the way, that interaction will create tremendous amount of conflicts. Conflicts are unavoidable. Therefore, if you want a healthy partnership between this new organizational logic and the dominant logic, you have to manage those conflicts down. That is the borrow challenge. The learn challenge is this. Every box-free experiment is simply a bet on the future. After all, future is unknown and unknowable. Therefore, you're essentially taking a bet on the future. I like to calculate a ratio. It's called assumptions to knowledge ratio. The number of assumptions you make relative to the number of things you know. Assumptions to knowledge ratio tends to be very, very high in box-free experiment on day one. Therefore, the learn challenge is learn to reduce that ratio over time. When you're trying to reduce that ratio, what you're doing is you're converting assumptions into knowledge. When you're converting assumptions into knowledge, the golden rule is spend a little, learn a lot. Because there are too many assumptions to test. Keep the cost of failure cheap. Then you can fail more often. To me, failure is nothing more than converting assumptions into knowledge. Fail early, fail fast, fail cheap, so that you can find a workable business model that you can scale up. What I mean by assumptions, let's again go back to the New York Times digital story for a moment. If you prepared, say, a business model for the New York Times printed newspaper in 1995, how accurate will that business plan be? What is a business plan? It's nothing more than sales revenue, costs, profits, investments, etc. If you prepared a business plan for the printed newspaper in 1995, you would agree with me that's probably going to be pretty close to being accurate. Maybe off by 1%. Why? Because you know the subscription rates, you know the advertisement rates, you know how much you're paying your journalists, etc. Suppose in 1995, you prepared a business plan for your box 3 experiment called New York Times Digital. How accurate would that be? It would be off by 100%, 200%, 1000%. Why? Because in 1995, you have no idea about the addressable market. Will people actually read news online? You didn't know. You didn't know the penetration of broadband. You didn't know how far the web will grow. You have no idea about the advertisement model. Who's going to advertise on this medium? How are you going to monetize that content? You have no idea whether you can charge for the content. Is content free or some content can be charged? No idea. You don't know how much it's going to cost to develop a web page. As a matter of fact, you don't even know who your competitors are. By the way, in your box one business, I know who I am competing with. In 1995, printed newspaper, New York Times, I'm competing with New York Post, Chicago Tribune, etc. But in box 3, New York Times Digital, I don't even know who I am going to compete with. A company called Google may just enter, I don't know. Facebook can come into my space. I don't know my future competitors. My point is, everything about your box 3 experiment is nothing but hypothesis. Therefore, the learn challenge is to learn to test hypothesis. So the 3 important challenges the box 3 experiment has to overcome are forget, borrow, and learn. Therefore, the key in building this new organizational logic is to build the logic so that box 3 experiment can forget the dominant logic of the performance engine, but at the same time can effectively borrow some critical assets from the performance engine and also learn to resolve these unknowns. When I talk about build an organization, I'm talking about these sorts of things: the structure, the systems, the people, the process, the culture. Think about people. Are you transferring people from performance engine into the box 3 experiment, or are you hiring people from the outside? That will determine whether the box 3 experiment can forget. Similarly, systems. Are you using the same performance criteria that you're using on the box 1 business? Are you using the same on the box 3 experiment? That will determine whether the box 3 experiment can forget, borrow, and learn. Let's continue this journey and try to understand what are the 3 important principles that will help the box 3 experiment to successfully forget, borrow, and learn.